Today marks 1 week out since the Mueller report was released, and right now the battle lines are about whether you'll learn everything that's in it. Top Republicans like Mitch McConnell telling people already to move on. Bill Barr saying everyone should just rely on his press conference instead of perhaps reading the actual findings from Bob Mueller. And while Democrats are talking up hearings to probe the facts, Americans are actually still reading the report themselves. It's been the most popular book on Amazon since it came out. That's pretty unusual for a 400-page government report. In fact, the Mueller report is so exhaustive, it's so detailed, it's actually so studded with facts and quotes and all kinds of stories, I don't think it's really possible to digest it all in a few days. And we've been reporting out different parts of it on this show, so you can make up your own mind about the evidence. And tonight, we present to you another absolutely wild story from the Mueller report that actually answers one of these recent mysteries. What was this all about?
Is President Trump prepared to let the special counsel pursue his investigation?
Well, I think he's considering perhaps terminating the special counsel. I think he's weighing that option. I personally think it would be a very significant mistake.
That was Trump insider Chris Ruddy, who runs Newsmax, seeming to dish on the very thing that might hamper or end his good friend's presidency, a massacre of trying to fire Mueller. So why would Ruddy go on TV to do something that seemed to undercut Trump? Because the Trump White House asked him to. Donald Trump's team was trying to save Trump from Trump. And the Mueller report documents that Trump's top aides, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and advisor Steve Bannon, tried to stop President Trump from ousting Mueller, saying his arguments to do so were ridiculous. They feared that Trump was not listening, that he didn't believe their warnings that all of this would backfire, or Chris Christie's warning that firing Mueller was the one thing Trump could do that would lead Republicans in Congress to abandon him. Mueller quotes that as well. So get this. Bannon and Priebus hatched a plan in June 2017. This is just about a month into the probe. And they meet with Ruddy, who you just saw on your screen, and tell him their concerns. Ruddy offers to publicize Trump's plan to fire Mueller. And that, of course, would seem credible coming from a Trump supporter like him. Priebus agrees, noting the plan might avoid another blow-up like the one that followed the termination of Comey. So to stop Trump from trying to fire Mueller, his own aides and a top loyal supporter plot this televised sort of test run of the plan to give Trump just a taste of the backlash and try to trick him into backing down. The Mueller report detailing on how, on the very day of the White House meeting I just described, Ruddy goes off to this respectable public affairs program. Keep in mind everything you've just learned as you watch this PBS clip again.
Is President Trump prepared to let the special counsel pursue his investigation?
Well, I think he's considering perhaps terminating the special counsel. I think he's weighing that option. I personally think it would be a very significant mistake.
Thanks to Mueller, we now know what was really going on there. Ruddy telling America, you guys, he's really going to try this, and then adding his own concern there as an afterthought. Now, Ruddy did not say this was part of a White House plot to stop Trump from his own desperate aides in that interview. He just said, hey, Trump wants to do it, and boom, cue the headlines. There you see it. Serious outlets, Trump considering firing Mueller. The legal and political world assessing whether this new disruptive president would Saturday night massacre himself in his first half a year on the job. And if you watch the news, you may remember Ruddy's gambit. It was everywhere.
Christopher Ruddy, and he told PBS that the president is considering possibly firing the special prosecutor Robert Mueller, which would be a bombshell of epic proportions if actually happened.
I mean, it gets more and more a rapid version of Watergate. Chris Ruddy, his colleague, perhaps his surrogate, are now putting out the word Mueller. Your life is limited here.
And actually, Chris Ruddy is pushing back as well. He just sent me a text a few minutes ago where he says that Song Spicer didn't deny my claim that the president is considering firing Mueller.
What you just saw is what Priebus and Bannon wanted, a crisis in the language Trump understood. Not a substantive crisis or on the ethics or the Constitution, a crisis on air. The White House reacting by saying Trump did not intend to fire Mueller while claiming that he could. And the Mueller report notes Ruddy's testimony that Trump was angry that he basically told on him. So the plan worked. It boxed Trump into his own denial. buying time at the very moment that Trump's aides were most concerned his anger might lead him to destroy his own presidency. So why am I telling you this tonight? One more interesting story, to be sure, from the Mueller report, but what does it reveal? One, Trump was pretty easy to play. Two, Mueller handles evidence fairly. The report doesn't use this pretty absurd story to malign all the participants. It notes the evidence that several of these people were trying hard to stop obstruction of justice. And three, this story, this corroborated report evidence from Trump's own highest-serving aides, shows that at least some of the time this White House is not operating as a rational organization. It's not operating as a place where plans are logically debated and then decisions are reached on the merits. What I'm saying, to depart for a moment from the dry language of the Mueller report, is that at times the depiction from Trump's own aides' testimony under oath is a White House that runs like a scary, vengeful, irrational dumpster fire of illogic, with a totally broken deliberative process, salted with secret plots to try to save the boss from his own ideas that are not just terrible, but are potentially criminal, according to the judgment of his own most loyal aides. Remember, the only reason we know these set of facts is because this happened to be the subject under criminal investigation. Is this how the White House decisions are made on security or foreign policy or the economy right now? Those are chilling questions. And they are broader than the important but narrower facts that Bob Mueller was authorized to probe in the first place. I'm joined by former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman.
Individuals that were willing to go to all sorts of lengths to save the president from himself. This story kind of plays like a bad episode of Veep. You know, I mean, they're out there, they're running around, they're trying to manipulate the president without him knowing, and then they enlist one of Trump's own friends to get out in the press and basically leak a potential Saturday night massacre so Trump could get a taste of what this is going to be like if he fires Mueller in the coming days.
What do you think those witness interviews were like? Would the Mueller folks have been skeptical at first because they reached this conclusion that this is actually what went down? But if someone at first said, oh, yeah, I talked about Trump firing Mueller, that you wouldn't necessarily assume that they were trying to stop that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a former federal prosecutor, if I got in a room with someone and prosecutors got into the room with these various witnesses, they were ready to accept those kinds of vignettes because they were a pattern and practice of what they saw Trump doing everywhere, kind of all mounting towards a massive case of obstruction of justice.
The television part of this obviously gets a little meta because we're talking about it on TV. And we can disclose that if Donald Trump has made television even more relevant in this era, okay, so be it. But take a listen to some Fox News hosts also echoing this view that basically what Donald Trump does is respond to TV.
So let me be clear, Mr. President.
I think the next thing the president should do is, beside pushing tax reform, which I think the plans are out there, is start doing some infrastructure.
I asked the president to blink the lights on and off if he was watching. Now, clearly he's watching. Again?
It's a video effect. We didn't actually do that. Anyway, just having a little fun.
How does that work in what Mueller's looking at? Because we're interested in some of the stories and, as I said, what they tell us more widely about how this White House was running, at least at that time. But he's got a narrow brief. What is he taking from this story?
Well, he's looking at obstruction of justice. And so when you try to impede or affect a law enforcement investigation, that's what prosecutors try to decide. Have they come dangerously close to impeding that investigation? That's an attempt to obstruct. So, you know, if you trip a police officer who's running after catch a bank robber leaving the bank after he steals the money, that's obstruction of justice. Whether the cops catch that bank robber down the street really is irrelevant to the question of whether the obstruction took place. So, you know, what Mueller's looking at is a whole bunch of people in various contexts doing things that are trying to prevent the president from obstructing. Sometimes they were successful, other times they weren't, and that's all the evidence that goes into a report that, at its height, arguably, or at least, you know, in my opinion, clearly makes a case for obstruction.
You do think Mueller made the case?
Yeah, I do. I may have wished that he'd gone a little further. And
how many incidents do you count that has strong evidence?
I'd say between 7 and 8, 9, somewhere in where when I was a prosecutor, if I had that kind of evidence, I would have brought those cases. And I'll tell you,
I'm at 5.
Okay.
Because I don't count Comey firing based on my reading of what Mueller found.
Right.
I've heard people say 6. You're up to 8. We'll have you back to go through some of them, because part of the idea of rushing this is not right. What we have to do is just process the evidence and see where it goes. Seth Waxman, thank you as always for bringing your expertise.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.